Thank you very much, Chantal, for a wonderful presentation. And we have just over 10 minutes for questions, both to Chantal and to Amy. So I just checked the chat. I have not seen any previous questions coming in. So I open the floor directly. I invite you to, well, raise your hand, but basically open up your mic and please speak.
Maybe I have a question to warm up.
Please.
I can go. Yeah, it's for both, in fact. So I think now there is a critical point. I think the point is that I think it was clearly stressed by Chantal. The fact is that the idea is that we need to know at a certain moment when we need or not a second dose. So the point of the duration of the immune response to the vaccine with one dose, I think, is crucial. And I like a lot this graph in which we see there is a plateau which remains constant with one dose, a bit lower than the two doses, but it remains constant. I wonder, does it exist a biological model which allows us to, let's say, extrapolate a bit and you know, what will happen or is likely to happen with one dose as compared to two doses? So can we say after 10 years of, we demonstrate, we have shown that after 10 years, the immunity will not decrease. Can we say, okay, it will not decrease for 15, 20 years or something like that? Because otherwise we have to wait until the end to see if we have to do two doses or not. Thank you for first Amy and then Chantal if she has something.
Thanks, Jacopo. I think that we biologically can say that it will continue to go on. I think a critical assessment in these graphs, I showed you a graph that just had one line that showed that it was stable, but we support that one line by looking at the distributions of the response and making sure that there's not subgroups that, you know, are falling. And so, you know, it does really seem that the very, you know, seropositivity is staying high. All of our metrics are really are doing a great job. So I think we can anticipate that in the, you know, in the medium term, we'll continue to observe the protection. Having said that, we, you know, our women that we've shown, you know, our one dose plateaus out to 11 years, they're in their 16-year study visit. And just to kind of due diligence, we're going to go to 20 years, really to just support the modeling data that keeps saying, you know, 20 years of protection, 20 years of protection. If we see it, the breakthroughs before then are substantial, you know, that could be concerning. So we do aim to provide the data, but we are very optimistic. And I want to definitely hear what Chantal has to say about it, but I think we also want to hear from someone like Margaret Stanley on the, you know, biology, immunology aspect too. Thank you.
Exactly. So I see the hand raised by Margaret, so I'll let her talk.
Well, the modelers, Jacopo, you're a modeler par excellence. When they modeled the antibody decay rates, see enormous constancy. In fact, the decay rate for the one dose antibody levels is much more flattened than the decay rates for 2 and 3 doses. So I think we can be reasonably confident that the one dose recipients remain seropositive for at least 10 years, which is 12 years now, which we've modeled, and certainly up to 20, and I would say 30. And that's, there's a lot of really very nice biological information suggesting that it's that prime, that initial contact between the VLP and the B cell is absolutely optimal for HPV because of the geometry of the VLP, the spacing between the neutralizing epitopes and the context in which the vaccine is being delivered. And I think that's crucial because it elicits a very pro-immunogenic environment with an almost ideal immunogen, the VLP. So obviously we have to have the data. We have to know what the distribution is. Is there a subset of individuals who do not reflect this? How big is that subset? What is the risk for that? All these questions have to be asked, but I'm not normally massively confident, but I am about one dose stability and protection.
So Chantal, was there anything you wanted to add from your side or in
Well,
relation to this
I
question?
think I think now the question is, would half a dose would be enough?
That's indeed a nice taking it a step further.
I think it is important, though, to kind of make sure, you know, I share Margaret's enthusiasm for one dose, but I think it's important to kind of set reasonable goals for one dose. And I think that we all have to recognize that, you know, there are great public health advantages if one dose continues to show what we've observed so far, but even if it's not the same as two doses, I think we can't set the bar so high where everyone's anticipating that one dose, we just won't need a second dose, one dose is just as good. And I think that that's still a research question and we don't know where that will land. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Thank you.
Can I just reinforce what Amy said? I think if there's one message that's coming from the COVID pandemic, it's that you want to get your population as immune as quickly as possible. And we're not even thinking that this immunity is going to last. We're just saying we are in the middle of a pandemic. We have got to get as many people immune as possible to reduce transmission. Now, HPV is an infection which causes disease way down the track, but the same criteria apply. We ought to get as many at-risk individuals immune as possible. And if one dose does that, we will have had an impact which is significant. And it's about deciding, do you want to drive a Rolls Royce to get from A to B, or do you want to drive a Model T, which might take, it might crank and creak a bit, but will get you to the same point.
Thank you. And indeed, it's about, of course, the Model T or the Rolls Royce. I'm also thinking about who can drive them, and that's also goes back to somewhat to the herd immunity part, right? And I think that's if we can reach very high coverage, and with the herd immunity, virtual protection for all, even with one dose. I mean, that is a price that has not been attained everywhere. We will see some of that when we look at coverages in a couple of minutes. Any other observations?
There is a question, I think, from Mauricio Maza. I don't know if you want to spell it out, Mauricio.
So I just, great presentations. I was wondering if you're in the groups of the WHO elimination strategy, like we've been part of the screening component, and it's very limited of saying, we want to screen at least at age 35 and at age 45. Is there an intention of saying a single dose by the age of 15 to get to that 90%? I'm just wondering, because it just seems that might be the way to go.
So I think, and there may be other people who want to step in when you refer to the cervical cancer elimination work. Some of the wording, as you will also know from discussions in your group, such as screening at 35 and 45, stems somewhat from the modeling. So we don't mean that you really need to get screened at exactly 35 and at exactly 45, and that's a model for 2 lifetime screens. And in vaccination, it is somewhat different. We also have this vaccinated by 15, which you see coming back. And it's also, I think, a model for saying get vaccinated early. It goes back in a way, and it's reinforced, I would say, by the data from Sweden, where we see this high protection when you are vaccinated when naive. So I think, yes, the idea is definitely get vaccinated by 15, and that if one dose is sufficient, that would definitely be the minimum aim. Now, we could open up whether, of course, if 1 dose is sufficient, whether we could use other strategies going up in age to get there earlier to get this bigger protection. So I don't know whether if anyone else wants to say something around that.
Maybe Eduardo Franco, he just posted, I think, a question exactly on this, on the problem of age. Eduardo, do you want to? Well,
hello, everybody. Well, a couple of lines of reasoning here. One is of course data from back in the phase 2 trials in the when they're first published in around 2004 or so, showing that data bridging the bridging studies had shown that titers were tenfold higher among the pre-adolescent than relative to the teenagers in the trials at that time. And the second line of evidence is Chantal's Quebec's data on the choice in 2007 to vaccinate 9 and 10-year-olds at much younger than other provinces in Canada. So this could be more of a scenario that would favor introduction of single dose on a more general scale, and would ensure that single dose would be just as effective of the others. So there is a difference in immunity, and I think Margaret would have a lot to say on that. We have spoken about that in the past as well.
Thanks for those observations. That's clearly interesting. I don't know whether you were referring to a kind of a stepwise, the 9 and 10 with 1 dose, and then maybe moving to 2 dose in somewhat higher ages and 3 dose above who knows what age. I mean, that's a thought to be maintained.
Actually, I'm saying that we tend to ignore, when we look at the single dose versus 2 doses, we tend to ignore, and Amy made that very important point about the age of vaccination, which not only hides the story of, not only tells the story about prevalent HPV at the outset, but also the fact that we're talking about a different level of immune response when you vaccinated pre-adolescents rather than adolescent girls.